When you see someone full of energy and motivation actively moving toward their goals, it usually means their dopamine levels are high. On the other hand, when someone feels depressed and lack of the energy to pursue their goals, their dopamine level is likely low. Dopamine is a hormone in our body that creates a desire to move towards something, helps us enjoy the journey, and give us pleasure when we reach our goals. Dopamine exists in our body in two forms. The first is base dopamine, the steady level present when we are in a normal state without any special stimulation or substance use. The second is a dopamine peak, which happens when we experience something we really enjoy. For example, eating a piece of chocolate can temporarily raise dopamine levels. What's important is that during the dopamine peak, the body uses some of the dopamine it had already prepared. After the peak, dopamine levels don't just return to baseline, they drop below it. That's because the body doesn't have enough dopamine immediately ready to maintain the base level. It takes time to restore. This explains why after a very enjoyable experience, like finishing a marathon, we might feel a bit down for a few days. The initial high is followed by a drop in dopamine, and our body needs the time to rebalance. Certain things can increase dopamine levels in the body. For example, eating chocolate can raise dopamine to about 1.5 times the baseline. Of course, people vary, and these numbers are averages. It's important to understand that dopamine spikes are temporary and always followed by a drop. And the higher the spike, the deeper the fall. Nicotine increases dopamine by about 2.5 times, but the effect is very short lived. That's why people become addicted. Dopamine rises quickly, drops just as fast, and they need another dose to feel good again, each time depleting the body's supply even more. Cocaine also spikes dopamine by 2.5 times, while amphetamines can push it up to 10 times. Imagine massive crashes afterward. Coffee, on the other hand, doesn't raise dopamine much, but it does something interesting. Caffeine makes dopamine receptors more sensitive. So, if you drink coffee and then do something enjoyable, like smoking a cigarette, the pleasure you feel is amplified. Not because there's more dopamine, but because your brain responds more strongly to it. Why did our bodies evolve such a system? Over thousands of years, the dopamine system developed to help us survive. Imagine living 10,000 years ago. You're hungry and need food. Dopamine drive you to start searching. Not only does the act of searching for food release dopamine, but reaching the goal does too. Once dopamine spikes, it eventually drops, making you hungry and motivated again. If dopamine didn't fall after reaching a goal, you'd lose the drive to keep going, and that would threaten your survival. This up and down cycle has helped us persist and thrive as a species. How does dopamine cause addiction? Imagine you are in a dopamine depleted state and you use a drug. Your body experiences a dopamine peak, but afterward, your dopamine drops below the baseline. Now, your mood is not just low, it's worse than normal. To feel better, you use the drug again. But your body hasn't had time to fully replenish its dopamine stores. So the second peak is smaller. Each time you repeat the cycle, the effect weakens. Eventually, you are not taking the drug to feel good, you're taking it just to feel normal. That's how addiction traps us, chasing diminishing highs just to restore our baseline. The things we can do to manage our dopamine levels naturally and without cost are called interruptions. Random breaks while doing an activity. This is the same system casinos use to keep you addicted. For example, you might win once every 4 times at a casino, but the timing is random. This unpredictability is what makes it addictive. Similarly, by taking breaks from the things we enjoy, we can regulate our dopamine levels, allowing us to keep doing what we love continuously and enjoy it more over time. Mr. Huberman explains that there are a few free ways to naturally control dopamine levels in our bodies. One of the main things he recommends is taking cold showers. Studies have shown that cold showers can increase dopamine levels by up to 2.5 times. Importantly, this increase happens gradually, and the slower the rise, the slower the drop, which makes it a healthier and more natural process. We suggest taking cold showers about 2 nights a week. He also talks about timing. When you wake up, try exposing yourself to cold water for 1 or 3 minutes. It might feel a bit uncomfortable, but not unbearable. If it's too easy, dopamine won't be released enough. So, it should be just challenging enough to trigger the response. Another way to regulate dopamine levels in our body is through intermittent fasting. Skipping a meal during the day can help you enjoy food more and better regulate dopamine related to eating. In modern society, everything is always available, and we often eat even when we are not very hungry. This constant eating can lower dopamine levels in our body. Many people who try intermittent fasting report that they enjoy the experience itself more, and while fasting, their mind feels sharper and their energy levels improve. Dopamine is a very intelligent chemical in our body, and we need to prepare our mind so it gets released during the process, not just at the end. For example, when we are genuinely interested in something and talk about it, dopamine is naturally released. In other words, we train our mind to enjoy the process by focusing on what interests us. Even when someone shares the opinion that aligns with our beliefs, it can trigger dopamine release. So, it's important to set ourselves up to enjoy the process itself, allowing dopamine to be released throughout, not just as a final reward. Sometimes when we do things we enjoy, we add extra layers to make them feel even better. But this can actually backfire. For example, imagine you enjoy running. The first time you run, it feels great. The second time, it doesn't feel as good as the first. So, the third time, you decide to play music while running, and it feels much better. You think, great, I always run with music now. But then, over time, running with music starts to feel less enjoyable. So next, you add another layer. You drink espresso before running. It feels good for a while, but eventually, even that stops working. You keep needing to add layers just to enjoy something that used to feel good on its own. The key is to use the same kind of random interruption system like casinos do to keep the activity enjoyable naturally without always needing extra layers. Smartphones are definitely addictive, and many of us don't use them properly. For example, when we get bored, we often turn to our phones for quick hits of dopamine, even if those hits are small, because they're constant and easily accessible. What smartphones actually do is encourage layering. For instance, you might enjoy going to the gym, but if you bring your phone and check social media or play music while working out, you're adding layers to the basic activity. These digital distractions can make it harder to enjoy the activity itself and create problems over time. Dr. Huberman says that sometimes we set rewards for ourselves to do some things, like saying, if I read these 10 pages, I'll go play a video game. This approach is actually not helpful because it sends a message to your mind that the process itself isn't enjoyable, only the reward is. As a result, no dopamine is released during the activity, and all the dopamine comes only at the end, when you get the reward. Over time, it can make you lose motivation and persistence to keep doing the task. He also explains that the sense of pleasure we feel depends on the difference between our dopamine baseline and the peak dopamine release. The greater this difference, the more pleasure we experience. So, the amount of dopamine we have isn't just about the current level, but also depends on the level before and after. For example, when you scroll through Instagram, you might see a post that makes you feel great, followed by one that isn't as good. The dopamine release from the second post feels weaker because it's compared to the high from the first. But if you had seen the second post first, you would have enjoyed it more. Our satisfaction depends on the contrast in dopamine levels over time. The art of regulating dopamine is to manage it so we don't overdo it. If you like something, don't do it too much or add too many extra layers. We aren't supposed to enjoy something at maximum intensity every time. Sometimes it should feel normal or even less enjoyable, so our dopamine baseline stays balanced. Thanks so much for watching this long video. I really appreciate your time and attention. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what stood out to you. How you personally manage your dopamine and motivation. By the way, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thanks again for being here. See you in the next one.